Hello guys, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Sakura chose Naruto but it was too late? Part 2. Rain poured down over the city. As water dripped down the towering skyscrapers, it highlighted the sharp edges the city had grown accustomed to. Every flash of lightning gave the towers in the city a distinct look of power and elegance. The towers stood proud with a sharpness that could not only be seen, but somehow felt. The man standing on the balcony of the highest tower looked out over the hidden rain village with a stern look. Curiously, his face didn't show pride at the city now under his control, just pure conviction. He was around the same height as Naruto and dressed in all black combat gear. His stance communicated not only elegance, but power. The rain splashed against his face as he took in the sight of the land now under his control. As he looked out over the city, he felt a familiar presence behind him. He turned around to see a small white snake looking up at him. The snake slowly transformed into a man. Orochimaru. The man turned back around to face the city and said in a firm, but slightly inquisitive voice, "What do you want?" Orochimaru looked out over the city before responding, "It's time to set things into motion." The man was silent. After a pause, he turned to Orochimaru, "Is that all?" Orochimaru smiled and responded, "Yes, that is all." The man continued to look out over the city. Orochimaru gave him one last glance before saying, "You don't have to look like Sasuke all the time. The disguise has served its purpose. The rain is confident in your leadership. Even if you reveal you aren't Sasuke, they will follow you." The man paused, then turned around and released his transformation jutsu. He had piercing eyes, but they weren't as piercing as Sasuke's. His hair was strikingly similar to Kakashi's, but jet black. It was different in that it stood up straighter because his Hitai wasn't dropped to cover one of his eyes. His right eye was a Sharingan and his left eye was a Rinnegan. Unlike Sasuke's Rinnegan, his Rinnegan had no Tomo. The man turned around and simply stated, "That's not the only reason I wear his face." Orochimaru smiled, then looked at him, "Ah yes, I forgot about your infatuation with Naruto. I suppose you're hoping to lure him here with this facade." The man stayed stoic-faced. Orochimaru studied him, then said, "You still haven't shared your plans regarding him." The man did not respond. Orochimaru was slightly annoyed but decided to give the man a word of caution anyway. "Be very careful. You may be planning to lure out Naruto, but if you keep up this facade, Sasuke will be knocking at your door soon. I have countermeasures in place for that. As a matter of fact, I'm surprised he hasn't come here already." His tone showed that he was a calculating man, meticulously examining every possibility and preparing accordingly. Orochimaru looked down as he put his hand on his chin and thought to himself that it was strange that Sasuke hadn't tried to put an end to this rumor. The man said in a simple voice, "If he isn't here, the only explanation is that he's aligned with someone who's coming here." Orochimaru turned to him, "You think he's aligned with Konoha?" After a short pause, the man said in a voice filled with conviction, "I know it." Orochimaru looked back up at the man and said, "In any case, do as I said. We strike soon." Orochimaru turned around, then looked over his shoulder, "Make sure to get some sleep, things are about to start picking up." The man turned and looked out over the city once more. "I'm changing some aspects of the plan. I'll confirm the details with you later." Orochimaru gave him a glare, "Excuse me." The man looked over his shoulder and said in a cold voice, "You heard me." Then turned back to the city. Orochimaru paused, then hissed back, "Don't forget your place, Hiken." Hiken kept staring out over the city and didn't even acknowledge him. Orochimaru made a face of suppressed anger and before long, he had turned back into that small white snake and slithered down a sewer grate. Naruto was still asleep when he heard his alarm go off. He scrunched his face in annoyance, then turned it off. He opened an eye to glance at the clock on his nightstand. 5 o'clock. He decided to wake up a little earlier than he usually did since him and Sasuke would both have to use the bathroom to get ready. He sat up on his bed, then let out a loud yawn. He walked over to his drawer, grabbed the clothes he usually wore under his Anbu armor, then decided to check to make sure Sasuke hadn't snuck off somewhere. He headed towards his room door, and as he opened it, his mouth dropped in astonishment and his eyes went into wide circles. There in the middle of his living room was Sasuke. He was meditating with his eyes closed in a sitting position, and he already had on his fighting clothes. The clothes Naruto had given him to sleep in were neatly folded and resting on the couch. Naruto thought to himself, I swear that guy is nocturnal. Then he realized that he had woke up slightly earlier than necessary and had lost around 15 minutes of sleep for no reason. He scrunched up his face in annoyance, then turned around and stomped into the bathroom and slammed the door. He wanted to ask Sasuke some questions, but he was too annoyed at the moment. Sasuke simply looked at the door, gave a slight grin and went back to meditating. By 5:25 Naruto was fully dressed in his Anbu gear. He muttered a, "Good morning," to Sasuke as he walked into the kitchen. "Morning." Naruto looked at Sasuke, and in an inquisitive voice asked, "How long have you been up?" "Since 4. Naruto's mouth dropped, then he mumbled in a voice he meant for Sasuke to hear, "I swear you're nocturnal." Sasuke slightly grinned as he sat in his meditating stance. Naruto looked in Sasuke's direction again. "Did you already have breakfast?" "Yes. And it wasn't ramen." Naruto's expression turned into one of restrained anger. Sasuke opened his right eye to watch, then grinned. Naruto noticed that Sasuke was just bothering him for fun and calmed down a bit. Naruto scrunched his eyes, then said, "Fine. But I'm having some," as he started to prepare some ramen. Sasuke once again grinned but kept his eyes closed. Sakura didn't sleep much last night, but she had finally come up with a plan. She was going to properly apologize to Naruto like Sasuke suggested. She knew it wouldn't be enough to fix everything then and there, but she resolved to take the first step in repairing their relationship. She just had to figure out when. Maybe she could talk to him after the training session if he was alone. She could probably get rid of Sasuke easily enough since Naruto didn't seem to have any qualms about letting him out of his sight. She finished putting on her shoes and set out towards her door like a woman on a mission. She opened the door, and to her shock, Ino was sitting on the ground opposite the door sleeping. "Ino." The blonde was startled out of her sleep to find an inquisitive Sakura staring at her. "What are you doing here?" Ino slowly stood up and looked down at her shoes before replying, "Well, when you didn't answer the door, I figured things must have went really bad between you, Naruto and Sasuke. I knew you were probably hurting really bad, and I didn't want you to feel like you were alone, so I stayed out here." Sakura looked in silent admiration at her old friend. After a moment she turned to Ino, "You're a true friend, Ino." Ino looked down before responding in a far more enthusiastic voice than Sakura was expecting, "You better believe it. Who else would sleep on this roach-infested floor for you?" Sakura let out a smile before responding, "Still the same, Ino." Ino let out a small smile and nodded in agreement. "I have a training session with Naruto now, but do you think maybe we could talk sometime later tonight? We don't have any missions right now, so I should be free tonight." Ino quickly shook her head in approval. "If you want, we could meet at that tempura restaurant you like. Maybe at 7 o'clock. Sakura nodded her head. "That would be nice." After a short pause, Sakura looked at Ino. "Well, I should probably get going." "Duty calls." Ino nodded in agreement and the two went their separate ways. Neji, Kiba and Shino were on their way to the training ground. They were walking at a moderate pace and there was a very uncomfortable silence. Kiba decided to break it. "So, that was some fight yesterday, huh?" Neji nodded his head in agreement and Shino simply replied, "Yes, it was." Kiba frowned at how his comment didn't do much to break the silence, then he tried again with a much more loaded question. What do you guys think is going on between Naruto, Sakura and Sasuke? There was a long pause before Neji spoke up. I am not sure. Hinata spoke with me yesterday, and apparently, the three of them went somewhere together after we left the training ground, probably to Ichiraku's. Shino kept walking at the same pace, but was obviously listening. Kiba, however, couldn't hide his surprise at the statement. No way. Neji nodded. Kiba hopped onto Akamaru, then turned to the two Anbu on his left. You think they're already on good terms? Neji responded rather quickly. I don't think so. From what Hinata said, it sounded like they looked like a rather broken team. Her observation was that Naruto looked like he didn't know what to do with them by his side. Kiba turned back and looked forward before replying with a solemn, "Oh." The three walked in silence before Shino spoke up. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. Neji nodded in agreement and Kiba replied in a soft voice, yeah, I guess so. Everyone from Naruto's team was now present and accounted for. This time Naruto had moved them to Training Ground 3. It was a slightly wooded area with an open field here and there. After everyone had exchanged greetings, Naruto turned to Neji, Kiba and Shino. As members of this team, you all have a right to know everything that's going on. As Neji, Kiba and Shino waited in anticipation, Naruto started. The scroll we intercepted on our mission ended up containing critical information. It was a communication between the sound and the rain. At first, we thought it was a regular communication, but the seal looked a little too complex for that. Upon breaking the seal, we discovered that it wasn't just any communication, it was a communication confirming a future offensive against the leaf and/or the sand. Neji, Kiba and Shino stood at rapt attention. In the communication, the rain's new leader was declared to be Sasuke. A look of confusion crossed the faces of the three shinobi. As you can see, that is not the case. When we ran into Sasuke, he was on his way to try to clear his name. He claims he has nothing to do with this alliance. Kiba looked at Naruto. No details about when this offensive may take place. Nope. Just confirmation that it will take place. As the three pondered the new information, they started to piece together the events of yesterday. After a drawn-out silence, Naruto decided to speak up. Now that that's over with, let's start team training. We're going to have a quick sparring session. As everyone turned to Naruto, he continued, normal rules. If someone incapacitates you, you're out and you have to go stand over there. He motioned to the opposite side of the training ground boundary. We're going to be fighting in teams. I've tried to balance out the teams as much as possible and the environment should help with that as well. Kiba and Shino, you're squad 1. Your diverse skill sets and experience working with each other should help you greatly. Sasuke and Sakura, you're squad 2. Not only do you guys have experience working with each other, but your skill sets are diverse and one of your members' visual prowess is unmatched. Neji, you're with me, we're squad 3. We have your skills, your Byakugan, and my abilities as well. Any questions? Naruto looked around and everyone seemed to understand what was about to take place. If there are no questions, then get into position. The three teams split up into a triangle and stood about 100 feet from each other. As Shino and Kiba took their fighting positions, Kiba whispered to Shino, just like old times, huh? As Shino took his fighting stance, he replied, just like old times. Sakura and Sasuke were now back to back. She smiled as she remembered their days on Team 7. She was taking her fighting stance when Sasuke spoke to her. We attack Kiba and Shino first. We won't be able to take Naruto down easily and he won't let Neji go down easily. It would be a waste of our chakra to attack the strongest fighters first. Sakura thought to herself, there he is being a tactician again. Sasuke saw Sakura looking a little unfocused. Got it. Sakura was knocked out of her thoughts and let out a firm, Yeah. As she took her fighting stance. Naruto was now back to back with Neji. If I know Sasuke, he's gonna go after the weakest links first, so Kiba and Shino are gonna be his focus. He's probably thinking we'll do the same thing. Neji tilted his head slightly. We aren't. Nah. He let out a cheeky grin. I'm gonna be a little unpredictable. Neji smiled as he saw a little of the old Naruto shine through again. I'll follow your lead. Naruto gave a short nod. His eyelids were now turning an orange color as he entered Sage mode. After everyone had taken their fighting positions, Naruto looked around to make sure everyone was ready. Begin. Sasuke and Sakura immediately dashed towards Kiba and Shino. Naruto thought to himself, I knew it. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. Sasuke immediately stopped and looked over to see multiple shadow clones multiplying his way. His expression turned into one of annoyance as he realized Naruto was forcing everyone to focus on him, the hardest fighter to bring down. He jumped up and did a series of hand signs, then fired a fireball jutsu from his mouth, dispatching around 30 of them. Naruto let out a slight grunt as the pain from the shadow clones hit him all at once. As shadow clones kept multiplying towards the different teams, Shino jumped into the trees, Kiba dropped a couple of smoke bombs, and Sakura started fighting the clones head-on. Neji looked around, so this was Naruto's plan. I must admit, it was rather effective. He couldn't even tell where the real Naruto was anymore. Suddenly one of the Narutos yelled to him. Kiba is using smoke bombs. Use your Byakugan to give yourself an advantage. Neji now realized that Naruto had probably thought about a way to take down every other nin at that sparring session. He had already set Kiba up and he was probably already going after someone else. He grinned as he thought about how fortunate he was to be on Naruto's team, then he went after Kiba. Kiba was trying to use the trees and some smoke bombs as cover, but Neji's Byakugan was too good. As Kiba was about to run past a tree, Neji dropped down from above. Gentle fist. He hit one of Kiba's less critical chakra points to avoid seriously injuring him. Kiba fell off Akamaru and gasped for air. Neji offered him a hand up. He reluctantly accepted it. Caught me off guard. Thank my Byakugan. Kiba nodded. You better get back to the fight. Neji nodded, jumped to the trees and started heading back towards the starting point of the fight. As Kiba reached the outer boundary of the training ground, he saw that Shino was already there. Ouch! Who took you out? He asked inquisitively. Shino kept watching the fight. Naruto, he said me going to the trees was too predictable. Kiba shook his head, he already knew that was what we would do. Sakura was mowing down Naruto clones at lightning speed. She yelled out a fierce, cha, as she punched one into the ground. Suddenly, Sasuke landed beside her. He looked slightly worn from having to battle all the clones. These things are pretty tough, aren't they? He said as she punched one into the ground. She jumped and kicked a rushing clone before replying, yeah, they're tough alright. Sakura. That's not me. Her head quickly swiveled to see a shocked Sasuke about 50 feet from her. You're too gullible. Naruto now had his arm around Sakura's neck. As he held her in his arms, he started admiring her pink hair and lost his focus as he thought about how things used to be between them. As he hesitated, Sakura noticed what was happening and headbutted him with the back of her head. OWW. And she stepped on his foot, too, then kicked backwards and hit him in the crotch, nice, as she elbowed him in the stomach. As he fell back in pain, the transformation wore off and he watched as Sasuke laughed at him from about 50 feet away while still fighting off some clones. Imagine that, Sasuke of all people laughing. GGGRRRRR. Suddenly around 20 clones surrounded Sakura. All of them said at the same time, that wasn't nice, Sakura. A look of panic crossed Sakura's face as she realized how much trouble she was in. Right before they could jump onto her, she heard Sasuke yell out, "Universal pull." Suddenly all of the clones were flying towards Sasuke. He did a series of hand signs and then used another fireball jutsu to dispatch of them. She let out a sigh of relief. She was in the clear, or so she thought. Suddenly Neji rushed out of a band of Naruto's clones and was right in front of her in a crouched position. Gentle fist. He hit her in the same exact spot he'd hit Kiba in. She lost her footing, but Neji caught her to soften her fall. As she caught her breath, Neji turned to her. You were too sure of your safety. That is why you fell. It's why you're about to fall as well. Neji turned to see none other than Sasuke Uchiha. He was holding his sword right at Neji's neck. Neji sighed and put his head down as he realized he was done as well. Sasuke turned away towards the remaining shadow clones and put his sword away. He went into a fighting stance, but, to his shock, the clones started disappearing. As Sakura and Neji reached the outer boundary with Kiba and Shino, they turned around to see all the shadow clones were gone. It was just Naruto and Sasuke. Naruto let out a slight grin as he took his fighting stance. Sasuke grinned as well, and in a flash, the two shinobi were fighting once more. As the two shinobi traded blows, Sasuke decided to create some distance and try some distanced attacks. He kicked off of Naruto's chest and launched about 50 feet into the air. He did a quick hand sign and started breathing multiple fireballs. Naruto continued to dodge them by using a variety of jumps and acrobatic flips. Naruto decided he'd enlist the help of some shadow clones, but as soon as he tried to do the hand sign, he saw a kunai flying straight for his hands. He let out a grunt of annoyance as he remembered how well Sasuke knew his techniques. Sasuke then used a kunai with a string attached to grapple back down to where Naruto was. As the two engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat, Naruto decided to try to create some distance so he could try to make some shadow clones again. He jumped back and landed about 20 feet from Sasuke. He tried to quickly do the sign to create some shadow clones, but he saw another kunai heading straight for his hands. He quickly sidestepped to dodge it but decided to try to maintain his hand position. Suddenly the kunai was gone and it was Sasuke who was flying through the air in front of him. His eyes opened wide as he noticed that Sasuke had used his Rinnegan to swap places with his kunai. He had no defense because his arms were still down from trying to make the shadow clones. He found himself on the receiving end of a knee to the face. As he struggled to regain his footing, Sasuke was already rushing him. Now he was slicing away with that sword of his again. As Naruto ducked and weaved to avoid Sasuke's sword, he got an idea. He waited for Sasuke to lunge with his sword before landing a kick to his core. Sasuke reeled back about 10 feet as he held his side. Now was Naruto's chance. He jumped back and started launching a shuriken and kunai barrage. Sasuke remembered their last fight and made sure to keep his eyes peeled. Just then he saw a tagged kunai flying towards him slightly up and to his right. There, he thought to himself. He ducked down and squatted to avoid it, then pushed out his hands as he waited for Naruto to teleport to the kunai. The millisecond of opportunity for Naruto to teleport to Sasuke was now over and Naruto wasn't on top of him. A look of confusion crossed Sasuke's face as he used his Sharingan to look over to the tagged kunai. As he focused in on it, his eyes widened. The tag read, "Explosive." He had been duped. Boom. He suddenly found himself blown about 50 feet to the side, sprawled out on the ground. Before he could make a move, Naruto put a knee on his back and pinned his arms behind his back. Gotcha. They were both breathing very heavily. After a short pause, Naruto slowly got up and let go of Sasuke. As Sasuke got up, he brushed himself off. After the two caught their breath, Sasuke thought about what had just happened, then turned to Naruto. Well played. Naruto let out a cheeky smile. Thanks. Soon after, Sakura, Neji, Kiba and Shino reached where Naruto and Sasuke were. Sakura looked a little concerned. Are you guys okay? Kiba interjected. Yeah, that was some fight. Naruto turned to Sasuke, paused, then started smiling widely. He replied in a voice that was almost ecstatic, I'm fine. You should worry about Sasuke. He's the one who just took a bomb to the face. Sasuke rolled his eyes and looked slightly annoyed. As Sakura started working on healing Sasuke's injuries, Naruto kept teasing him. So, Tem, you know I'm gonna tell Kakashi-sensei about this, right? Make sure you also tell him about how you let your guard down and got hit in the nuts. Neji, Kiba, Shino and Sakura all started giggling. Naruto scrunched his eyes at the jab that was just thrown at him, then crossed his arms and turned to Sakura, that wasn't nice. She kept tending to Sasuke and said with a smirk, you shouldn't have let your guard down. As Naruto scrunched his eyes even more, Sakura took in the sight of him acting a little bit like his old self. She was done tending to Sasuke's injuries and had started working on Naruto's injuries. Before she could finish, Shikamaru walked over to them and looked at Naruto. We have new intel. The Hokage needs to speak to you and your team, now. Tsunade and Kakashi were discussing the new intel as Shikamaru brought Naruto's team into the Hokage's office. Tsunade looked up from her desk. Good, you guys are here. Naruto looked at a scroll resting on the table. Is that the new intel? Tsunade stood up. Yes, it is. Then she turned to Kakashi and gave him the floor. Kakashi was sitting down and stood up before speaking. Let's start with the basics. That scroll is from the sand, written by Gaara himself. A look of slight shock crossed the face of the shinobi before Kakashi continued. We recently sent word of Sasuke's innocence to the sand. Naruto looked at Kakashi. What about the other lands? Kakashi replied, so far, the sand is the only one we've sent this information to. We need to keep this intel regarding Sasuke and this business between the sound and the rain quiet. Regardless of his actions in the war, Sasuke is still a hot topic whenever he's brought up. Naruto looked at Sasuke, then back to Kakashi and gave a nod of understanding. After Gaara received our intel, he sent back this communication thanking us and provided us with some new intel. Naruto stepped forward. What is it? Kakashi replied, in short, a mission. The 6 nin were now showing their interest. This, however, will be a complete reconnaissance mission. The mission will be performed in deep shadow conditions. Sasuke now stepped forward. Just what type of mission is this? Kakashi looked at Tsunade, then back to Sasuke and the team. Gaara has a location on the intel regarding the future offensive against the leaf and/or the sand. The information we need is stored on the computer of the person impersonating Sasuke. You guys are going to retrieve it. Naruto replied as he looked over at his team. That means that we're headed to the rain. Exactly, except for one thing. The team turned to look at Kakashi. Due to the nature of the mission, it wouldn't really help to have 6 of you on the mission. A reconnaissance mission is best carried out by a small group of ninja. Your team is currently too large at 6 members, that's why your team will consist of 3 members. Naruto looked slightly exasperated as he could already see what was going on. He was being set up. Kakashi watched his reaction before finishing what he was saying. Naruto, as the head of the team, your presence is a non-negotiable. By extension of that, Sasuke must also be present on this mission. The choice for your final team member is up to you. Naruto's eyes widened as he felt his throat tighten up. He assumed they would just put Sakura on his team since she was a medic, but they gave the choice to him. Maybe since it was a simple reconnaissance mission, there didn't necessarily have to be a medic. Naruto turned to his right and looked at Sasuke, who was now staring directly at him. He had that same blank stare, but Naruto could tell he was waiting to see which decision would be made. Would he choose Sakura, or someone else? Sakura had already put her head down. She saw what Kakashi and Tsunade were trying to do. The only problem was it wouldn't work. Naruto was talking to her now. but it was mainly professional and they still weren't close enough for him to choose her over someone else. Not only that, she didn't have any skills that would be useful on a reconnaissance mission. Neji had his Byakugan, Shino had his bugs and Kiba had his senses. On top of that, she had just kicked him in the nuts. Naruto felt the pressure mounting. He felt his throat start getting a little dry and thought it would be nice if he had some water. He tried to knock himself out of it, but it wasn't working. As he let out a silent gulp, he heard Kurama's voice, "Just remember what I said, kid." Naruto paused, then started thinking about how Kurama had told him that the only reason he was having so much trouble with Sakura was because he wasn't trying. After a few seconds of thought, a smile came to his face followed by an expression of resolution. Soon after, he entered Kurama's chamber. He looked up to Kurama and said in a soft but firm voice, "It's gonna hurt, but I'm gonna try this time." After a pause, he continued in a noticeably more enthusiastic voice, "And I'm not only gonna try this time, but every time after." There was a certain fire in his eyes, a fire of determination. Then he held out a closed fist to Kurama with a wide grin. Kurama smiled, then gave him a fist bump. "You're gonna be okay, kid." Kurama smiled as he thought to himself, "I knew he was in there somewhere." Naruto looked over to Kakashi and said in a proud voice, "I choose Sakura Haruno." Then he turned to Sakura, gave her a thumbs up, and one of his trademark, closed-eye smiles. Sakura's head immediately flew up. She was stunned and felt the blood rush to her cheeks as he smiled at her. What happened to cause this much of a change? For once, she saw those blue eyes fill with that vibrance from when he was younger. Not only that, there was a fire in those eyes. She didn't know what it was for, but she knew it was part of the reason he looked a little like his old self. She could feel her eyes starting to water, but she resolved not to cry in front of everyone in the room. As she finally regained her composure, she found herself at a loss for words, so she just smiled and let out a very determined nod at Naruto. Her eyes were a little watery and her cheeks were still slightly pink, but she didn't care because Naruto had chosen her. Naruto was still hurting, but he found some comfort in Sakura's reaction. He could tell she was surprised, but that she was also happy on the inside, and that made him happy. Kakashi smiled and looked at Tsunade, who was now smiling. He automatically knew what she was thinking, success. Shikamaru was smiling at the sight when he noticed Kakashi turn and give him a wink. Then he remembered that they had bet on when Naruto and Sakura would reconcile with each other. He had gotten free lunches from all the other members of the Konoha 11 and he and Kakashi were the only two left. Kakashi was off by a few months, but Shikamaru was off by a few years. All because of an unpredictable variable, Sasuke. He sighed as he thought about owing Kakashi a month's worth of lunches, but he couldn't bring himself to stop smiling. The moment was just too good for that. Neji, Kiba, and Shino also smiled as they soaked in the sight. There was a small moment of silence before Sasuke broke in. "Good choice, Dobi." Naruto turned to Sasuke who was slightly smiling and facing forward with his eyes closed. Naruto grinned slightly and then turned to Kakashi, "So when do we leave?" Kakashi turned to Naruto, "About that, first things first. You guys will be wearing these." Kakashi walked over to Tsunade's desk and pulled a huge briefcase out from under it. It was around the same size as a travel suitcase, but had two combination locks holding it closed. After he popped it open, he reached into it and pulled out 3 stealth uniforms. They were all black with strong padded armor underneath all of the vital areas of a ninja's body. He tossed one to Naruto, who quickly started to look over it before saying in a hushed voice, "Awesome." Kakashi smiled as he saw the old Naruto start shining through the rough exterior Naruto had been wearing the past few years. "Everything else you need is in here. From the device you'll use to secure the information to the building plans showing the location of the computer. The shoes that go with those uniforms are also in here, along with your masks, and other miscellaneous items that may be useful on this mission. Sasuke turned to Kakashi. Masks. Kakashi turned to the briefcase and picked one up. Well, we can't really have you guys on a reconnaissance mission with no masks. You guys are probably the 3 most famous ninja in all the known shinobi world. If anyone saw you, your cover would be blown. Nothing identifying you with Konoha or any clans either. He threw the mask to Sasuke. It's not that bad, right? Sasuke examined it. It was a simple black mask with a slit for the eyes. He rolled his eyes and replied in an annoyed voice, "Fine." Naruto smiled, then turned to Sasuke. "Come on, Sasuke, it won't make you look too different from how you usually look." A small vein formed on the side of Sasuke's head and Kakashi let out a slight chuckle. Sasuke immediately turned and looked at him. Kakashi's eyes opened a little wide as he thought of an excuse. Sorry. Mask jokes just get me." He rubbed the back of his head uncomfortably, then cleared his throat as he changed the subject. "Last thing, we were hoping to get this intel as soon as possible. We don't really like being in the dark about a planned offensive against us." Naruto turned to Kakashi. "Does that mean we leave immediately?" Kakashi replied, "Something like that," then turned to Sasuke. Sasuke looked back at him. "What does that have to do with me?" Kakashi looked a little pensive, but at the same time, inquisitive. "If I remember correctly, one of the abilities of the Rinnegan is traveling through space-time. Do you think you could teleport the team into the land of rain?" All eyes were now on Sasuke. He crossed his arms and after he thought to himself for a while, he replied, "I'm only used to using my Rinnegan to travel to other dimensions. I can try to focus on traveling only in this dimension, but I'm not sure if it would work. Maybe I could quickly pass through a different dimension and return to this one." After he thought about it for a second, he continued, "I think that would work. The only problem is that using that technique is a huge chakra drain. If I use it too much, I temporarily end up losing my ability to do that technique, my ability to use my Mangekyo Sharingan, and some abilities of my Rinnegan." Kakashi's eyes slightly widened. He knew the technique was a chakra drain, but he didn't think that overuse would have such a detrimental effect. Do you think you could do 2 trips without any serious side effects? I don't want you weakened if there's an offensive against us." Sasuke pondered for a moment then replied, "Yeah, I think I can do it." His only concern was that this would be his first time crossing through dimensions so quickly. He planned to quickly enter a different dimension, then exit near the hidden rain village. He had never done that before, so it would be his greatest obstacle. Kakashi gave a nod before replying, "Then suit up. Tsunade and I will be waiting at Training Ground 3. The rest of you are dismissed." As Naruto's team left the room, he looked into the briefcase and grabbed everything Sakura would need. He walked over to her and handed them to her. "Here you go." It still hurt to talk to her, but seeing her have such joy at the new development made it hurt a little less. Sakura's cheeks remained a light pink as she looked down shyly and smiled before accepting them. "Thanks." Naruto gave a smiling nod, turned around and walked back over to the briefcase. Naruto put his uniform back in the briefcase, then closed it and motioned for Sasuke to follow him. "Let's get ready." Sasuke nodded and followed him out the door. Sakura stood in the office smiling as she looked down at the uniform Naruto had just given her. Tsunade and Kakashi looked at each other, then Kakashi interrupted, "You should probably go put it on." Sakura was knocked out of her daze and nodded before replying with a slightly embarrassed, "Yes, sensei." As she started walking towards the office door, she stopped short of grabbing the door handle. She turned and looked at Kakashi and Tsunade inquisitively. There were only 3 outfits in that briefcase. "This one is exactly my size." Her eyes started watering as she asked, "How did you guys know he'd pick me?" Kakashi immediately smiled and said, "Because we know Naruto." After a short pause, Sakura smiled, then nodded and walked out the door. Tsunade turned to Kakashi. That went better than expected. Kakashi wore a slight grin as he replied, I think it's because we aren't the only ones trying to help. Naruto and Sasuke were now changing in different stalls of the men's restroom. So what happened out there? Naruto looked up as he slipped into his uniform. What do you mean? I mean when Kakashi gave you the burden of choosing our last teammate, you looked like a fish out of water. Then you regained your composure, and chose Sakura. Naruto was finally in his uniform. He just needed to put on his shoes. He let out a slight sigh. Do you remember when you went out for air last night? Sasuke smirked at the jab thrown at him. Yeah, I talked to Kurama. He basically said the only reason I was having so much trouble with Sakura was because I wasn't trying. Sasuke was now finished changing and walked out of the stall. So now you've decided to try to fix things. Naruto walked out of his stall and looked at himself in the mirror. The uniform looked sleek but somehow bulky due to the armor. It didn't feel that way though. It felt as light as a feather. After he was done examining it, he replied to Sasuke, yeah, basically. I mean, I can't change what happened, so I've just gotta try to focus on the future. The voice he replied in made it sound like he was trying to convince himself. Sasuke had his mask in his right hand and his original fighting clothes in his left. He pondered over Naruto's words, then replied, it looks like he was right. Naruto kept looking at himself in the mirror as he replied, maybe. Sasuke gave him a glance before asking him, what does that mean? Naruto smiled but put his head down a little, nothing much. It just still hurts, that's all. Sasuke looked over to Naruto and saw that although he had taken a huge step in mending his relationship with Sakura, he was still in a lot of pain. He paused for a moment, then replied in a firm voice, Naruto, I know it hurts, but if you could somehow find a way to push past that pain, you and Sakura could have a really great relationship. He looked over at Naruto, who was downcast but obviously paying attention before finishing his thought, just keep it. Naruto stared at himself in the mirror for a few seconds before slightly smiling and turning to Sasuke. I knew the mountains had been good for you. Sasuke looked away and grunted before changing the subject, HN. Where do we put our clothes? Naruto hadn't thought about that, so he just turned to the briefcase. I guess we'll just put them in here until we get back. Sasuke placed his neatly folded clothes in the briefcase. They rested there with the Uchiha logo clearly visible. Naruto put his Anbu gear on top of them and, last of all, placed his fox-shaped Anbu mask on top. As Sakura changed into her uniform, she wondered what could have caused such a quick change in Naruto. She knew Sasuke was trying to help, but could he have really made that much of an impact? She didn't even get to apologize to Naruto like she had planned to. As she started putting on her shoes, she let out a small sigh and noticed her eyes were watering. Soon after, felt tears were running down her cheeks. At first, she thought they were tears of joy, but then she realized she was feeling a little sad. She let out a slight sniffle as the tears kept running down her face. Her feelings were becoming more and more confusing to her. She was supposed to be happy. Naruto was finally starting to go back to normal, and their relationship was finally looking like it would improve. So why was she sad? As she finished changing, she walked out of the restroom stall with the clothes she had been wearing in one hand, and her mask in the other. She looked in the mirror and wondered why she was still feeling sad when she heard a knock at the door. Sakura, are you almost done? Hearing Naruto say her name in a semi-affectionate way again cheered her up a bit. She felt her body relax a bit as she smiled and yelled out, 1 second. She grabbed some tissues to clean herself up, but her face still looked a little off, so she decided to put her mask on now before she walked out of the restroom. Naruto and Sasuke were facing away from the restroom as she walked out. As she walked out of the restroom, the two of them turned around. Naruto and Sasuke both noticed she already had her mask on. It was pretty obvious that some tears had been shed, but Naruto just pretended not to notice and Sasuke did the same. Naruto opened up the briefcase and said, "You can put your clothes and shoes in here." She nodded as she placed her Anbu gear on top of the pile, followed by her shoes and Anbu mask. Naruto gave a slight smile before closing the box, then looked at the two and said, "Let's go." Tsunade and Kakashi were standing on training ground 3 when they spotted the 3 shinobi in the distance. Kakashi waited for them to arrive then gave them some final instructions. Remember, this is purely a reconnaissance mission. There shouldn't be too much activity in the rain right now because it's still pretty early in the morning, but try not to be seen anyway. Do not engage with any enemies unless absolutely necessary. Is that understood? The 3 shinobi gave nods of understanding, then Kakashi turned to Sasuke, "Take it away." Sasuke turned and looked at an open space, then his Rinnegan started glowing a vibrant purple. The region began to quickly warp into a different space-time and before long, a purple, swirling portal was formed. Kakashi turned to the 3 nin, "Good luck." The 3 nodded, then Naruto entered the portal, followed by Sakura, then Sasuke. Naruto, Sakura and Sasuke exited the portal and found themselves standing at the edge of a forest. It was raining, but not heavily. It was more like a faint drizzle. The raindrops were barely audible as they fell against the forest leaves. Naruto looked up as raindrops soaked his mask and body armor. They were definitely near their destination. He looked out into the distance and saw the distinct skyscrapers that were unique to the city. The skyscrapers stood tall and elegant with very clear-cut edges, angles, and borders. Surrounding the city was a large lake. It was definitely the hidden rain village. He looked over to Sasuke and whispered, "Nice work." Sasuke turned and gave a curt nod. As Sasuke nodded, Naruto's head slightly tilted to the side as he looked at him rather quizzically. Sasuke asked, "What is it?" Naruto looked slightly puzzled as he replied, "Your Rinnegan, it's missing those dots that are usually there." Sasuke turned away and looked out towards the city, "It's fine." Naruto looked at him with a little bit of concern but decided to drop the subject. After that, Naruto turned to Sakura then back to Sasuke. He pointed to the highest tower in the city. "The information we need is in there. Just follow my lead. You guys ready?" Sasuke and Sakura nodded in agreement. Naruto turned to face the village, "Then let's do this." The 3 nin looked out across the lake surrounding the city. There was a faint mist on the lake and the fact that it was raining made it look even more ominous than it already did. Naruto reached into his pouch and pulled out 3 small rebreathers. He put his rebreather on, then gave Sakura and Sasuke theirs. These were in the briefcase. Sasuke and Sakura gave short nods as they accepted them. There were a few guards around the lake. Naruto quickly made a couple of shadow clones and sent them off to be distractions. The clones started making small noises to attract attention to themselves. As the guards began to investigate, the 3 nin silently dropped into the lake and started using their chakra to propel themselves towards the city. Naruto decided to undo his clones after they were a reasonable distance away. As they reached the other side, they let only their eyes float above the surface. The 3 slowly and silently got out of the water, then climbed onto a wooden dock. Naruto noticed 3 nin standing guard at one of the main entrances to the city, then he turned over to Sasuke and gave a nod. Sasuke nodded back, then picked up a pebble and tossed it towards the guards. The 3 guards immediately turned and started walking towards them. They couldn't see them due to the mist, but Sasuke could see them due to his visual prowess. As soon as the 3 guards were fairly close, Sasuke activated his Sharingan. The 3 guards looked on the dock, then looked over the water and saw exactly what Sasuke wanted them to see, nothing. As the 3 guards stared out over the water, Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura were already on the rooftop of one of the lower buildings. It was still morning, but the rain clouds made it relatively dark and easy to find cover. The three nin made sure to stick to the shadows as they headed towards the building in the center of the city. After a few minutes of moving through the shadows, the three nin stopped on top of a building directly adjacent to the target building. Naruto looked up at the sharp building. There were many air ducts they could enter through, but he was looking for one in particular. He pulled out some building plans from his pouch. After examining the plans for a little while, he finally located the air duct he was looking for. He pointed to it and whispered to Sasuke, "There." Sasuke nodded and stuck out his hand. His Rinnegan glowed a light purple, then the duct cover flew off the building and into his hand. The three ninja threw kunais with strings attached and used them to pull themselves up to the air duct. Naruto entered first, then Sakura, then Sasuke. Naruto looked at the plans he was holding, then he looked back to the two, "This way." The three nin crawled through the ducts and, after making a series of twists and turns, found themselves over a large office. Naruto looked at the plans again, then said to them, "This is it." He put the plans back into his pouch, then kept looking through the vent opening until he spied the computer. It was resting on an office desk that was uncannily clean. The only thing that looked out of place was a sword resting against the side of the desk. Naruto nodded in the direction of the desk. "That computer has the information we need." He looked through the vents to make sure no one was in the room, then slowly pushed off the grate. He made sure to catch it so it wouldn't fall to the ground, then he placed it in the air duct. He slowly used one hand to lower himself out of the grate, then when he had steadied himself, he let go and dropped silently to the ground. As Sakura and Sasuke dropped down, Naruto immediately ran to the door and pressed his ear against it to make sure no one was coming. After Sasuke dropped down, he silently ran over to Naruto. "I'll keep watch." Naruto nodded and silently ran over to Sakura, who was now breaking into the computer. She kept her eyes on the computer as she whispered to Naruto, "Gaara gave us some good intel." "I'm in." Naruto replied in a hushed voice, "I knew we could count on him." Sakura smiled as she plugged in a small flash drive and started searching for the information they needed. Naruto looked at the various files on the screen. "Got anything yet?" Sakura kept working and said in a low voice, "No, but I'm close." She looked through various files and, after a few short moments, she saw one titled, "Oh, just like Gaara's intel had said." Sakura gave a slight smile. "Got it. Just one problem. It's encrypted." Naruto turned to her. "Can you crack it?" "Yeah, I'll just need some time." As Sasuke kept his ear to the door, he heard footsteps coming their way. "Someone's coming." Naruto looked over to Sakura and said with an urgency in his voice, "We'll have to crack it when we get back to Konoha." Sakura nodded, then removed the flash drive. Sasuke had already jumped into the duct as Sakura and Naruto started heading towards it. Sakura jumped in first, then Naruto. As Naruto got ready to put the grate back on, someone walked into the office. Naruto's eyes opened wide. It was Sasuke's impersonator accompanied by another man. Sakura found herself staring at the man while Sasuke held a very fixed gaze on him. He walked over to a small bar in the office. It had a small pitcher of water on it along with a few glasses. He poured himself a glass of water and stood there for a moment. After a few moments, Sasuke whispered to Naruto, "Cover the grate." Naruto was knocked out of his daze and slowly covered the grate. Naruto turned to Sasuke and Sakura. "That was creepy." Sakura nodded while Sasuke remained reflective, then the three nin turned around and started silently heading back the way they came. As soon as they left, Hiken smirked, then turned around and looked directly at the grate. He took a sip of water then looked over to the other man who was in the room. "Tashisu, notify Tonto that we have intruders. Let's give them a warm welcome." Tashisu gave a short nod and quickly left the room. Hiken walked over to his desk, then opened a drawer and pulled out a black mask. He released his transformation jutsu, then put on his mask and grabbed his sword. Naruto, Sakura and Sasuke came out of the same grate they entered through and landed on the same rooftop they had entered from. As they dropped down into an alley, Naruto turned to Sasuke. "Get us out of here." Sasuke nodded, then looked into the alley as his Rinnegan started glowing a dark purple. A portal started forming, then, out of nowhere, it just disappeared. Naruto and Sakura looked over to see Sasuke grunting in pain with his hand over his Rinnegan. Naruto and Sakura gave semi-worried glances to each other. This mission was quickly getting a lot more complicated. Sasuke looked up and tried to form another portal only to fall to his knees in pain. Sasuke. As Naruto held him by the arm, Sakura quickly turned to Naruto and put her finger over her mouth. "Shish. No names." Naruto remembered the nature of the mission and nodded. Sakura was more worried than Naruto, but she tried to keep a calm head. "I can try some medical ninjutsu." Naruto thought about it, then nodded, but before she could do anything, Sasuke interrupted. "That won't do much." They both turned to Sasuke with looks of confusion. Sasuke reluctantly said, "The issue is overuse. I don't have enough chakra to make a portal. I've been using my Rinnegan a lot, and on top of that, I had to use it in a way I've never used it in before for us to get here." Sakura remained serious, then turned to Naruto. He was team captain, so he had to make the next call. He let out a sigh of exasperation, then turned to Sasuke. "I knew it wasn't fine." Sasuke couldn't really argue with him, so he just kept looking down the alley. After a few seconds of thought, Naruto asked, "What if I give you some chakra?" Sasuke thought about it for a second, then replied, "That could work." Naruto clenched his fist. It turned a bright orange, then he simply touched Sasuke's shoulder. A red aura similar to the one Naruto had given the ninjas in the Fourth Shinobi War formed around Sasuke. Sakura looked out to the other end of the alley. "We better be quick. I'm getting a bad feeling." After a few seconds, the red aura disappeared, then Sasuke turned to Naruto and Sakura. "My visual prowess is back." They both turned to see his Rinnegan already had the 6 tomo that were missing before. Naruto let out a sigh of relief. He thought the mission might end up going off script, but it looked like things were starting to get back on track. Before anything else could happen, they heard a voice from the end of the alley. "You know, it's not every day that I find people with enough nerve to sneak into my city." The heads of the 3 nin swiveled to the end of the alley. To their shock, they saw 3 nin standing there with swords drawn. Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura noted that they all had on masks and combat gear. The gear was similar to their own, but while 2 of them wore a very dark gray color, one of them was dressed in pure black. He was no doubt their leader and the most powerful in the group. He also had a Sharingan and a Rinnegan. He was definitely the Sasuke impersonator, but his eyes didn't look like Sasuke's. The 3 nin realized that those must be his real eyes and made sure to memorize the details. Naruto turned his head slightly towards Sasuke and Sakura, and whispered through gritted teeth, "So much for a reconnaissance mission." Hiken stepped forward. "You're coming with us." Naruto turned to Sakura and Sasuke. "Cut and run. No signature moves." The 3 nin immediately separated. Naruto ran up the alley wall, Sakura ran out of the other end of the alley, and Sasuke dropped a smoke bomb. Hiken gave orders to the 2 nin accompanying him. "I'll take the one going up the wall. You 2 handle the others." His voice was disturbingly calm considering the situation. The 2 nin immediately went into pursuit. Tanto went after Sasuke, while Shinto went after Sakura. As Sasuke tried to escape to the shadows, he was cut off by Tanto. As Tanto let out a yell of rage, the left side of his face turned a gray color, his eye turned a yellow color, and his arm turned into a spiky gray mass and shot out towards Sasuke. Sasuke dodged it, then thought to himself, "It can't be." As Tanto threw another punch, Sasuke dodged under it and activated his Sharingan. Soon the two shinobi were standing in a dark, red hallway. Sasuke's expression changed into one of confusion as he saw the shinobi standing on the other side. It was exactly who he thought it was, Jugo. Jugo looked across to see a confused Sasuke across the hall. As Jugo realized who he was fighting, Sasuke yelled across the hall, "Long time no see." Jugo was stunned. He didn't expect to run into Sasuke of all people. "Sasuke, what are you doing here? I was just about to ask you the same question." Jugo stood in stunned silence for a few seconds before replying. "Orochimaru had us come here as bodyguards to your imposter. He doesn't know our true identities. We're basically a safety precaution. After you betrayed Orochimaru, he made sure to be more cautious." Sasuke smirked before replying, "You said, our true identities. Who's the other shinobi?" "Suigetsu." Jugo paused then gave a quick nod. Sasuke looked down as he started pondering the new development. Jugo looked over to Sasuke, "It's good to see you're doing okay." Sasuke looked up to see Jugo staring at him. He replied with a brief, "Same." After a few more seconds of thought, Sasuke turned to Jugo, "I need you to tell me everything you know about my imposter." Jugo paused and his face twisted into a pensive state before he looked up and replied, "We don't know much, but his name is Hiken. Me and Suigetsu know Orochimaru is working with him, but we don't know of any plans. The way Hiken acts, I'm not sure even Orochimaru knows what's going on half the time. He plays his cards very close to his chest." Sasuke continued to process the new development before turning to Jugo. "That's all you know?" "Yeah. Sorry if I couldn't help much." "No, you've helped more than you know. At least now we have a name, thanks for the info." Jugo nodded, then replied, "So if you're here, you're teammates." Sasuke smirked as he turned away, "Naruto and Sakura." Jugo gave a slight smirk as he realized that him and Suigetsu never stood a chance. Sasuke started to undo the genjutsu as he spoke to Jugo, "Keep fighting, we can't blow your cover." And Jugo looked over to him. "Nice seeing you again." Jugo smiled then nodded and instantly found himself back in the real world. As Sasuke threw a punch, Jugo blocked it using his right forearm, then used his spiky left arm to punch Sasuke onto another roof. As Sasuke landed on the roof, he regained his footing and looked over to Jugo who had already jumped onto the roof. "That was a little rough." Jugo smiled under his mask, "Gotta make it look real." Sasuke smiled as the two started to trade blows. Sakura was trying to avoid any contact with Suigetsu, but he was proving to be harder to lose than she thought. As she jumped across a rooftop, she noticed that Sasuke had beat his opponent and was now heading towards her and Suigetsu. She was about to drop into an alley so Sasuke could take care of Suigetsu, but then she noticed Sasuke was staring in her direction. As she looked back, she blinked and found herself in a genjutsu. She suddenly found herself in an open red field. As she tried to make sense of her surroundings, she heard a voice. "Sakura." She turned around to see it was Sasuke who was now grabbing her shoulders. "Sasuke, what are you doing? No time for that." The two people were fighting Jugo and Suigetsu. "They're undercover, that's why that guy called them different names." Sakura immediately found herself back in the real world. She turned to her left and saw that Sasuke was already using his Sharingan on Suigetsu. Jugo must already know. After she had made sense of everything, she looked over to Sasuke and Suigetsu. After a few seconds, she saw Sasuke hit Suigetsu with a Chidori to the face. Suigetsu's body started to liquefy as he flew through a few buildings before landing on a sidewalk. It was a light Chidori though. Sasuke was definitely holding back. As she joined Sasuke where he was, he turned to face the direction that Naruto and Hiken were fighting in. "I have new intel. We'll talk later. For now let's head over to Naruto, we need to get out of here." Sakura nodded and then they started heading towards where Naruto was. Naruto kept moving through the dark alleys of the city to try to avoid combat. Hiken was trailing him using the rooftops, but he couldn't manage to get a good position to strike from. As Naruto jumped into an alley, Hiken held out his hand, universal pull. Naruto suddenly felt his body start flying towards the rooftops. He quickly used his chakra to attach his feet to one side of the alley. His upper body strength prevented his upper body from flying upwards. Naruto held his stance on the side of the alley wall despite Hiken's universal pull. Hiken smiled, then released his universal pull and jumped down onto Naruto. He landed on Naruto's stomach and kicked him straight down into the alley while he planted his feet on the side of the alley. As Naruto started to recover, he tried to do the hand sign for a shadow clone jutsu. Hiken immediately stretched out his hand and used his Rinnegan to push a trash can into Naruto. Naruto was taken aback as he thought about what had just happened. He had no time to perform the shadow clone jutsu as Hiken immediately started to exchange blows with him. Naruto got caught off guard by the sudden change in fighting style but was able to adapt pretty well. As Naruto ducked under a kick, he decided to try to create some distance to escape by running up the alley wall. As soon as he was halfway up, he heard another, universal pull. He tried to stick to the wall again only to have the bricks under his feet fly off the side of the building. As he came crashing down into some garbage bags, Hiken rushed him with his sword out. Naruto gave a face of exasperation as he thought to himself, "Man, this guy just won't quit." As Hiken started to make a move, he heard a voice from the end of the alley. "Almighty push." Before he could turn around, he felt a strong force pick him up and push him halfway across the city. Naruto watched him fly through a series of buildings, then gave a sigh of relief as he saw Sasuke and Sakura standing at the edge of the alley. "Thanks." Sasuke quickly replied, "You're welcome. We need to get out of here before he comes back. We have new intel." Naruto nodded and Sasuke used his Rinnegan to open a portal back to Konoha. The three nin wasted no time jumping through. Hiken brushed himself off before jumping onto a nearby rooftop. As he looked in the direction of the escaping nin, he was met by Jugo and Suigetsu, who looked considerably beat up. Jugo turned to him as they looked in the direction of the escaping nin. "Aren't we going to follow them?" Hiken kept looking into the distance as he smiled, then replied with what looked like a glint of pride, "No. First of all, we probably wouldn't catch them, but secondly, having information isn't the same as having answers." Jugo and Suigetsu cast confused glances at each other. Hiken smirked, then turned around and started heading back towards the main building. He motioned to the rubble caused by his fall as he started walking away. "Take care of this." Then he looked over to the building Suigetsu had been punched through, and that. Jugo and Suigetsu gave short nods as Hiken walked away. Kakashi was laying on the branch of a tree reading Ichi Ichi Paradise as he waited for Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura to return. He saw a purple portal start forming out of the corner of his eye and looked down to his left into the open field. After a few seconds, he saw Naruto come out of the portal, then Sakura, then Sasuke. He closed his book and put it in his pouch, then jumped down. As he walked towards them, he spoke in a relatively relaxed voice, "I trust the mission was a success." Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura removed their masks before Naruto replied, "Yeah, and I think we got more intel than we bargained for." Naruto tilted his head towards Sasuke. Kakashi turned to Sasuke and let out an inquisitive, "Oh." Sasuke still looked like he was thinking about the information but nodded in agreement. Kakashi looked at their uniforms, which looked slightly beat up. "I'm guessing everything didn't go exactly as planned." Naruto smirked, then nodded. "We ran into Sasuke's impersonator." Kakashi's eyes widened at the news. After a short pause, he put his hand on his chin. "We need to talk to Tsunade." The three nin nodded in agreement. Then the four started heading towards the Hokage's office. Tsunade looked up as she heard a knock on her office door. Come in. She was hoping it was Team 7 and smirked as they walked in and proved her suspicions to be correct. Did you guys get the intel? Sasuke spoke up. That and then some. Tsunade intertwined her fingers as she waited for the new intel. Sasuke crossed his arms as he started. When we got to the Hidden Rain village, the mission went smoothly. We had successfully retrieved the information, but upon trying to leave, we found out that my Rinnegan was exhausted. Kakashi slightly squinted his eyes at the news. He knew that using Sasuke's space-time dojutsu was a risky move, but he didn't think it would almost derail their mission. Sasuke was watching his reaction and made sure to address his concern. Don't worry Kakashi, Naruto gave me some chakra and my visual prowess returned. Unfortunately, that small delay was all it took for us to be spotted. Tsunade looked over to Kakashi then back to the three. Do you guys think he identified any of you? Sakura shook her head no while Sasuke stood with a blank stare. Kakashi turned to him, Sasuke. Sasuke smirked then looked over to Kakashi, I used my Rinnegan to get rid of him. That might have given away my identity. Kakashi dropped his head as he realized that Sasuke had purposefully let his impersonator know that he was on his radar. Tsunade sighed then turned to Naruto who stood pensive. Tsunade looked over to Naruto, Naruto. After a few seconds, Naruto responded, I can't be sure, but when I was fighting Sasuke's impersonator, I tried to make some shadow clones so I could lose him. He immediately used his Rinnegan to push a garbage can into my hands so I couldn't do the hand sign. It was almost like he was ready to stop any attempts on my part to make any clones. But how would he know to stop me from making clones? It was my first time fighting him, the only other person I've fought who's ever responded that quickly. Sasuke interrupted, is me? Sasuke looked down and fell into a more pensive state than Naruto. Sakura looked down as she thought to herself. After a few seconds, she said, well he did have a Sharingan. Tsunade and Kakashi quickly looked over to Sakura. Kakashi asked in a voice that showed his slight shock, he had a Sharingan. Sasuke interjected before Sakura could reply, and a Rinnegan. Tsunade stood up and her head quickly swiveled to Sasuke. What? Naruto nodded, then said, yeah, he was wearing a mask, but we could see his eyes. His right eye was a Sharingan and his left eye was a Rinnegan. Kakashi put a hand on his chin as he considered the new information. After a few moments, Naruto continued, I still don't think that's why he responded the way he did though. When I tried to make the shadow clones, I could see his eyes. As soon as I started to make the sign, it looked like he realized that was what I was trying to do. Like he somehow knew how dangerous it would be to let me make any clones. After a moment of silence, Sasuke spoke up, he most likely knew who you were. It's probably not a coincidence that he went after you personally. He let out a small sigh of exasperation, which means he probably knows I'm aligned with Konoha. As the five pondered the information, Sasuke decided to reveal the rest of the intel. His name is Hiken and he's working with Orochimaru. All four heads swiveled to Sasuke before he continued, when we were spotted, we fought Hiken and two other shinobi. I was fighting one of them when I noticed the left side of his body transform and his left eye change color. The transformation looked familiar, so I used my Sharingan. It was Jugo. Looks of shock crossed the faces of Naruto, Kakashi and Tsunade. Naruto turned to Sasuke, but that's not what Hiken called him. Sasuke replied, Jugo gave me some intel. They're undercover. After I turned on Orochimaru, Jugo said he started taking certain precautions. So they're basically his backup plan for if Hiken turns on him. Naruto slowly nodded as he took in the information. Kakashi and Tsunade looked at each other as they processed the new development. Naruto turned back to Sasuke, so the other shinobi. Sasuke replied, Suigetsu. They let us take them down, not that we wouldn't have been able to. Naruto nodded as he started to process the information. After a few moments of silence, Kakashi turned to the three. Any other interesting developments? Naruto looked to the other two. I don't think so. Sasuke and Sakura nodded in agreement. Kakashi turned to Tsunade. If that's the case, let's go over the intel you guys got from that computer. Sakura reached into her pouch and pulled out the flash drive. It's encrypted, but it shouldn't take too long to crack. Tsunade had a laptop resting on her desk. She moved from behind the desk before motioning for Sakura to get to work. Kakashi, Naruto and Sasuke turned to leave as Sakura sat behind the desk and started working. Before they left, Kakashi turned to Tsunade. Let us know as soon as she's done. Tsunade smiled. Careful Kakashi, you almost sound like you're the Hokage. Kakashi wore his usual blank expression before replying in a monotone voice, not my style. Tsunade smirked as the three left her office. Hiken sat on a rock at the edge of a forest with his sword resting against the side of the rock. His demeanor was calm and patient, but calculating. As he looked out into the open field, he heard a noise and turned around to see a man slowly walk out of the forest, Orochimaru. He was accompanied by Jugo and Suigetsu. Hiken stood up very quickly and said in an enthusiastic voice, "The man I've been waiting for." Orochimaru was taken aback by his enthusiastic welcome. Hiken was many things, but he was never enthusiastic. Orochimaru studied him, then said, "The shinobi I gave you said you wanted to see me." Hiken smiled as he stepped towards his sword. "Yeah, I did." Orochimaru slightly squinted his eyes as he asked, "What's this about?" "I'm a busy man." Hiken smiled as he picked up his sword and started to unsheath it. He continued in a matter-of-factly type voice, "Not for much longer. I'm afraid our partnership is going to have to come to an abrupt end." Orochimaru smiled as he turned to his left and looked at Jugo, then to his right at Suigetsu. "Is that little bit of swordplay meant to imply that you're planning on killing me?" Hiken held his sword up straight and ran his finger along the side of it. "You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for." Orochimaru smiled as he replied, "What instigated this abrupt change?" Hiken started to hold his sword in a more combative stance. "Let's just say certain events are about to take place. To put it briefly, I have a plan, and you're not in it." Orochimaru chuckled to himself in a way that showed he was laughing at Hiken's audacity. "Hiken, you don't even have enough power to kill Naruto yet. You still need me, although that ship has sailed due to this little stunt. On top of that, did you really think I would leave myself so open to a betrayal?" Jugo. Suigetsu. Jugo and Suigetsu removed their masks as they prepared for battle. Jugo's left side started changing color while Suigetsu reached towards his back and pulled out his executioner's blade from under his robe. Hiken started laughing to himself before replying to Orochimaru, "Come on, Orochimaru. Those two shinobi you gave to me, I knew they couldn't be trusted." He turned serious as he continued, "You've never been the giving type. Not unless you're getting something in return that is. And regarding Naruto, I never said I wanted to kill him, I have different plans for him." Orochimaru's face suddenly grew serious as he hissed, "What does that mean?" Hiken smiled as he took his fighting stance. "I'm afraid you're not going to live long enough to find out." Orochimaru's right arm changed into a band of 6 snakes. "I told you to remember your place, Hiken. I made you all that you are and I gave you those eyes you so proudly wear. You're nothing without me." As Hiken got ready to make the first move, the smile he was wearing slowly faded from his face as his expression turned into one of disgust. "You see, that's the problem, Orochimaru. Ever since the day you gave me these eyes, you thought you owned me. Ever since then, you've been trying to force me to live in your shadow, now you're gonna die in mine's." As the tension grew, all 4 shinobi stood at attention and in a split second, Hiken was on the move. As he started dashing towards the 3 shinobi, the band of snakes lurched from Orochimaru's right arm and started violently heading towards Hiken. Hiken used his Sharingan to dodge them with ease, then did a series of hand signs and spit out fire onto them. 3 of them got caught and burned while the other 3 returned to Orochimaru's side. Orochimaru let out an annoyed grunt as he wondered what other jutsu Hiken had picked up using his Sharingan. Hiken smirked, then outstretched his left arm, universal pull. Orochimaru grounded himself by turning his other arm into snakes and having them dig into the ground. He tilted his head to the side in confusion as he noticed there was no force pulling him. He turned to his right and saw none other than Suigetsu flying towards Hiken. Orochimaru grunted as he realized Hiken was going after his backup. Orochimaru quickly used the snakes on his right arm to grab hold of Suigetsu. Hiken smiled, then pointed his sword towards Suigetsu and funneled lightning through it. The lightning extended straight through Suigetsu. As the lightning hit Suigetsu, he let out a grunt of pain and slowly started to liquefy. Orochimaru gritted his teeth in annoyance because he was also being electrocuted due to his snakes being wrapped around Suigetsu. After Suigetsu had fully liquefied, Orochimaru detached the electrocuted snakes from his body. The snakes fell to the ground as they twitched from the electricity. Hiken looked over to Suigetsu's now liquefied body. Downside of being a mole, I know your weaknesses. Orochimaru clenched his jaw in annoyance. Then whispered to Jugo, get out of here. Jugo turned to Orochimaru in shock, then whispered back, but he'll kill you. Orochimaru squinted his eyes, and if you stay here he'll kill you too. I know what I'm doing. Now go. Jugo paused for a second, then started running towards the forest. Hiken watched with a blank expression as Jugo left. Huh. Guess being a snake in the grass comes back to bite you real hard. Orochimaru let out a slight chuckle, you have no idea. As soon as he finished his sentence, he opened his mouth wide and hundreds of snakes started rushing towards Hiken. As the snakes slithered towards Hiken, their mouths opened wide and swords started protruding from them. Hiken held his sword steady, then proceeded to use his sword in conjunction with his Sharingan to mow down the snakes. As Orochimaru started planning his next move, he felt something sharp pierce his chest from behind. All at once, the snakes stopped moving. Orochimaru's eyes widened as he started coughing out blood. He turned around to see Hiken standing there holding the lightning-enhanced sword that had just impaled him. Hiken let go of the sword as Orochimaru reeled back and fell to the ground in pain. Orochimaru looked over to the Hiken that his snakes had been rushing towards only to see it disappear. It was a shadow clone. Hiken kneeled down on one knee by the dying Orochimaru. You know, Orochimaru, I could have killed you so much quicker than this, but I think it's fitting that you die with a strike from behind. Now you'll die just like the snake you are. After a few moments, Orochimaru coughed up one last bit of blood, then his head fell back on the grass of the open field. Orochimaru was dead. Hiken stood up, then removed his sword from Orochimaru's body and sheathed it. He then turned around and picked up Orochimaru's body. He turned to where the executioner's blade and Suigetsu's liquefied body had been only to see that it was no longer there. He remained unfazed and simply walked into the forest. As the 3 stood outside the Hokage's office, Kakashi made sure to pay attention to Naruto and Sasuke. He was hoping that some progress had been made in the department of putting Team 7 back together. He glanced at Sasuke, who looked to be his usual pensive self, but as he looked at Naruto, he noticed that he seemed slightly dejected. He was expecting Naruto to be a little happy, but instead, he looked like he was thinking about something that was very hard to deal with. Kakashi squinted his eyes as he realized that Naruto was probably thinking about his relationship with Sakura. Naruto turned and caught Kakashi looking at him and decided he better try to find something to do. Anything was better than having Kakashi examine him. He looked on the ground and saw the briefcase that had their clothes. He had left it outside the Hokage's office before they went on their mission. He turned to Kakashi, So now that this reconnaissance mission is over, can we change back into our regular clothes? Kakashi replied, I don't see why not. Naruto grabbed the briefcase and motioned for Sasuke to follow him. Sasuke nodded and started walking with him towards the men's restroom. Kakashi squinted his eyes at them as they left. He thought things were looking better after what had happened earlier. It looked like Naruto had started going back to his normal self, but now something had changed. Kakashi couldn't put his finger on it, but something was definitely off. He didn't see any of that anger or closed-off attitude Naruto had exhibited over the past few years. Instead, it looked like he was just in emotional pain. Kakashi let out a sigh as he realized that Naruto's problem wasn't gone but was instead changing. He found himself wondering if something had happened on the mission that the three nin left out of the mission report. Maybe he'd ask Sasuke later. As Naruto and Sasuke were changing, Sasuke spoke in a slightly inquisitive voice, "What's bothering you?" Naruto dropped his eyes. He was trying to escape from Kakashi, but now he had to deal with Sasuke. He spoke through his stall in a voice that didn't hide his annoyance, "I'm fine." As Sasuke put on his shoes, he replied with a simple, "Okay." Sasuke's short reply left Naruto a little confused. He was used to Sasuke's one-word retorts, but that was a little easier than he thought it would be. He thought Sasuke would keep pushing for information like he did when he had first arrived, but instead he just backed off. After Sasuke's reply, there was an awkward silence between the two. After a few seconds had passed, Naruto found himself feeling a little bad for shutting Sasuke down, especially since Sasuke had just let himself be shut down. Naruto let out an audible sigh, then spoke as he walked out of his stall, "I'm just thinking about things." As Sasuke walked out of his stall, he replied, "Things related to the mission we just completed, or things related to Sakura?" Naruto smiled and shook his head. He knew Sasuke already knew the answer. "Sometimes I hate you, Tem." Sasuke let out a small smirk before replying, "So what's on your mind?" The two shinobi were now fully dressed and were standing in front of the sinks. Naruto looked down into the sink, then up into the mirror. "I thought that I could fix things with her if I just tried hard enough, but it isn't working." After a short pause, he continued, "I tried to push past the pain, to put on a smile, but the more I smile at her, the more it reminds me of why I stopped. And when I try to get closer to her, it just reminds me of why I distanced myself from her." Sasuke slowly gave an understanding nod. After a few seconds of looking over at Naruto, he realized that Naruto still wasn't ready to let what had happened go. After a few seconds of silence, Sasuke let out a small sigh and turned to Naruto, "If that's the case, then don't work on that right now." Naruto's eyes slightly widened at that. He thought that everyone, especially Sasuke, had been pushing for him to fix his relationship with Sakura. Now Sasuke was backing off of that idea. Sasuke continued, "As comrades, you guys have to at least get along, so try to focus on that. Maybe someday, you'll be able to forgive her, maybe not. But whatever happens, you can't really be enemies with her. You guys work together." As Naruto looked down into the sink, he thought about what Sasuke had said. After a few more seconds of thought, he lifted his head to look at himself in the mirror. Sasuke watched him and noticed there was a certain determination in his eyes, like he had resolved to do something. Sasuke asked in a semi-inquisitive voice, "What is it?" Naruto paused for a moment, then said in a serious voice, "I'm gonna talk to Sakura." After a short pause, he continued, "I can tell that she thinks things are just gonna eventually go back to how they used to be. I can't let her keep thinking that." Sasuke paused, then gave a nod of understanding. As the silence dragged on, he turned to Naruto. "So, we gonna talk in here all day?" Naruto smiled then walked out of the restroom with Sasuke following him. As Naruto started to walk in the direction of the Hokage's office, he noticed Sasuke wasn't moving. He looked like he was thinking about something. What's up? Sasuke looked pensive for a second before replying, I'm gonna go meditate. That new intel could turn into a mission, we need to be ready. Naruto nodded, then paused for a second and said, you should probably eat something too, you know. Sasuke slightly shook his head and said in a monotone voice, I'm fine. Naruto gave a slight chuckle, then looked over to Sasuke. Separating could be risky. You're still supposed to be accompanied by me at all times. Sasuke wore his usual blank expression, there's an easy way around that. Just make a shadow clone and use a transformation jutsu. Naruto squinted his eyes as he thought about it. It actually wasn't a bad idea. After a few more seconds of thought, he replied, okay. That could work. He looked both ways then did the hand sign for a shadow clone jutsu. After the shadow clone was created, he used the transformation jutsu to turn the clone into Sasuke. Naruto looked over to Sasuke, I need to know where you'll be so I can call you if the decryption finishes. Sasuke thought to himself for a second then said, I'll head over to the Hokage monument. That should be a quiet place. Naruto nodded then said, see ya later. Sasuke nodded then started walking in the other direction. Sakura had recently finished setting up the decryption program to break the encryption. She turned to Tsunade who was sitting in a chair across the room, this is gonna take longer than I thought. The first encryption was easy to break, but files been encrypted multiple times. Tsunade looked down pensively before asking, how long do you think it'll take? Sakura stared at the screen for a little while, then replied, a few hours at the least. Tsunade looked over to a clock that was on the wall. 10:07 a.m. She turned to Sakura. When do you think it'll be done? Sakura looked over to the clock as she replied, maybe around 1 p.m. Tsunade paused, then nodded and stood up. Are you actually actively doing anything? Sakura replied, nothing much. The program is doing most of the work. Tsunade thought for a second, then turned to Sakura. She noticed she looked a little out of it so she decided to take over the decryption process. If that's the case, I'll take over here and let you and the others know when it's done. We don't know what intel we're gonna find, so make sure to eat something and try to rest up. We don't know if this new intel is gonna result in another mission. Sakura stood up, then nodded in agreement. Before she could leave, Tsunade asked her, so how are you doing? Sakura looked a little taken aback, but managed to smile and said, I'm fine. Tsunade paused to look at Sakura, then gave a small smile before replying, no you're not. Sakura's smile slowly faded. After a short pause, Tsunade said in a gentle voice, it hurts doesn't it? Sakura kept looking down but said in a soft voice, what? When that forgiveness you were looking so hard for seems to have finally been given, but the pain doesn't go away, Sakura let out a slow sigh and nodded before saying in a barely audible voice, I don't know what to do. Tsunade looked at Sakura with a gaze of understanding before replying in a soft voice. Sakura, you have to start by doing the hardest thing, you have to forgive yourself. A small tear formed under Sakura's eye as she continued to stare at the ground thinking about what Tsunade had just said. As Tsunade stared at Sakura, she found herself empathizing with her and said in a warm voice, I believe in you, Sakura. You're a good person, you've just made some bad choices. With time, I know you'll find a way to make things right. After a few moments, Tsunade noticed the tears that had formed at Sakura's eyes and decided to lighten the mood. Remember, I'm a lot older than I look, kid. She paused, then smiled and said in a jovial voice, now get out of here. Sakura lifted her head, then smiled and gave Tsunade a nod as she turned to leave. As Sakura walked out the door, she closed it behind her and saw Naruto and Sasuke walking towards the office. She was thinking about heading back to her apartment to grab something to eat and get a little rest, but she saw the briefcase in Naruto's hands and noticed she was still wearing her uniform. As Naruto and Sasuke reached where she was, she said in a humorous voice, "Uniforms were uncomfortable." Naruto managed a small smile. "No, just didn't need them anymore." Sakura thought for a little, then replied, "Yeah, I'm gonna change back into my usual outfit too." After a short pause she continued, "Where are you guys headed?" Naruto scratched the back of his head and let out an uncomfortable chuckle. "This actually isn't Sasuke. It's a clone I used a transformation jutsu on. The real Sasuke is probably meditating right now." He did the shadow clone hand sign, and then the clone disappeared. Sakura's eyes widened at the news. After a moment of stunned silence, she managed to ask Naruto, "So where are you headed?" Naruto looked up towards the ceiling as he started thinking to himself, "I'm not sure yet." After a little while, Sakura motioned to the briefcase he was holding and said, "I'm gonna need that." Naruto looked down before replying, "Yeah. I almost forgot that this was the whole reason I came back here." He paused, then spoke in a soft but firm voice, "There's just one thing I have to talk to you about first." Sakura silently gulped. She was hoping to have some time to think about how to fix things with their relationship, but now it looked like Naruto was broaching the subject. Naruto slightly dropped his head as he began, "Do you remember when you said you loved me?" A slight blush crept up to Sakura's face as she replied, "Yeah." Naruto kept looking down, "Do you remember what I told you?" Sakura didn't have to think for long before she dropped her head and replied in a soft voice, "You told me you hated people who lied to themselves." Naruto slowly nodded, and after a short pause, he continued, "That's what I've been doing." Sakura slowly looked up into his eyes. As their eyes met, she saw that same pain she had been seeing for the past few years. No vibrant blue. No joy. The only thing there was the pain that she had caused, and it made her sick to her stomach. Naruto looked away as he continued, "I told myself that if I just tried hard enough, things could go back to how they were between us, but I was lying to myself." He paused then looked back to her. "No matter how hard I try, I can't just let what happened go, I can't." Sakura found herself tearing up at the sight of a broken Naruto. It was her fault he was like this and there was nothing she could do about it. She wiped away a tear before replying with a soft, "Okay." She didn't really know what more she could say. He was obviously still hurting and couldn't move past her betrayal. She had to accept the consequences that her choice had brought to her. After a moment of silence, Naruto nodded then said in a soft voice, "Thanks for understanding." Sakura slowly nodded. After a short moment of silence, Naruto put down the briefcase by Sakura and said, "I better get going." Sakura slowly nodded as he started walking away. And just like that, she felt her hopes of fixing her and Naruto's relationship start to fade. Naruto felt a little bad while he was walking away. He knew that Sakura was probably in a world of pain right now, but he was confident that he had done what needed to be done. He wasn't going to lie to himself anymore and he couldn't just let Sakura think everything was okay. As Sasuke sat cross-legged with his eyes closed on the head of the third Hokage, he felt a familiar presence behind him. "I hope you don't plan on making a habit of stalking me, Kakashi." Kakashi smiled under his mask as he kept reading from his book. "Don't worry, I won't. I just need some information, then I'll be out of your hair." Sasuke kept his eyes closed and let out a semi-annoyed sigh before standing up and turning to Kakashi. "What is it?" Kakashi decided to cut straight to the point. "Did something happen on the mission? Something between Naruto and Sakura?" Naruto seemed a little off. Sasuke smirked. "You're off the mark, Kakashi." Naruto was a little off. Sasuke looked out over Konoha before he continued. "But not for the reason you think." After a short pause, Sasuke continued. "As a matter of fact, I think it was our fault." Kakashi lifted his head from his book to examine Sasuke, then asked, "How so?" Sasuke continued to look out over Konoha as he responded, I think we tried to help him fix things a little too. Sasuke paused and smirked as he thought of a fitting word. Vehemently. Kakashi looked out over Konoha as he thought about what Sasuke said. As he was thinking to himself, Sasuke continued, we weren't the only ones trying to help him. Kakashi turned to Sasuke, who was still looking out over Konoha. Before we went on our mission, he told me Kurama had spoken to him as well. Kakashi was a little surprised at the new development. He knew that Naruto and Kurama had become friends during the war, but for him to also be involved in something this sensitive was a bit of a shock. They must be closer than he originally thought. Kakashi put one hand on his chin as he put his book in his pouch. Sasuke wore a contemplative expression as he continued. When all of us kept trying to help him fix their relationship, we pushed him into trying to forgive her, and I just don't think he was ready to. I think he really wanted to forgive her. As a matter of fact, I think he still wants to forgive her, but he's just not ready to right now. He can't just let it go. Sasuke looked a little pensive, then continued after a short pause, unfortunately, I don't think we can do anything to change that. After a few moments of silence between the two, Sasuke continued. He actually said he'd talk to her to make sure she knew where they stood. For now, he can only be comrades with her, nothing more. Kakashi dropped his head and let out a short sigh. He didn't want things to be the way they were, but he understood why things were the way they were. After a long pause, Kakashi turned back to Sasuke. Well, at least now I get why he was a little off. Sasuke smirked as he sat back down, then said, good, now you can stop stalking me. Kakashi smiled under his mask then said, one last thing. Sasuke shook his head a little before Kakashi continued. What about you? Have you considered coming back to the village? Sasuke looked out over Konoha before replying. I'm fine, and I already told you this village isn't on my path. As soon as we've dealt with Hiken, I'm leaving. Kakashi looked at the Uchiha with a bit of pity. He could tell he wanted to return, but his inability to let go of what could have been along with his guilt for his past crimes were keeping him from coming back. Kakashi turned around to leave before saying, Sasuke, you can't just keep living the way you're living. Moving from mountain to mountain with no real home. Sasuke sat silent for a few seconds, then replied in a silent, solemn voice as he looked out over Konoha, maybe not, but it's fun trying. Kakashi looked back at him and realized that every single member of Team 7 had issues, major issues. And it didn't seem like he could help with any of them. He let out a small sigh, then disappeared in a puff of smoke. Hiken stood in the center of his office. He was standing in front of a camera with a coffin to his right. After a few seconds, the man operating the camera gave a thumbs up and said, we're live in 3, 2, 1. Hiken looked into the camera with a solemn expression. Good morning, citizens of Omegakure. He was now on every TV across the rain-drenched land. Citizens stopped in the streets to look up at the new face. He was wearing his standard all-black combat gear, but he wasn't wearing a mask. His Rinnegan and his Sharingan were clearly visible for all to see. TV and video. After a short pause, Hiken continued, my name is Hiken, and I am a former aide to the one we called Sasuke Uchiha. There were slight murmurs among the people in the village before Hiken continued. I wish I could be greeting you all under better circumstances, but unfortunately that isn't the case. He paused then let out a small sigh and continued, I'm going to cut straight to the point. I know that we have all been rallying behind Sasuke Uchiha. After the death of Pain, our village has barely limped on with no real leadership. That all changed with the arrival of Sasuke. We committed ourselves to following him as he promised to lead us into a new era of prosperity where we would crush all who dared to oppose us. He claimed to be able to protect us from all harm, no matter where it came from. He slightly tilted his body towards the coffin on his right as he continued, "My brothers and sisters, I'm afraid that we've all been deceived." Sasuke Uchiha was being impersonated by none other than this man. He raised his right hand towards the coffin and opened it as he said in a disgusted voice, "Orochimaru." Orochimaru's dead body caused gasps to pour across the city as people began to murmur at the new development. As the dissension started to grow in the city streets, Hiken raised a hand to try to calm the people down before he continued. "I know this comes as a shock to us all. As his assistant, I had more access to him than most. It was due to this fact that I was able to catch Orochimaru releasing the transformation jutsu he had been using to deceive us all." The people continued to murmur among themselves as Hiken continued. "He tried to lie his way out of it, but as soon as I saw that pale white skin of his, I knew he'd been deceiving us like the snake he was. Fortunately, his shock at being caught gave me the ability to catch him off guard. I managed to kill him with a strike from behind." He motioned towards where he had stabbed Orochimaru, showing the deep gash. "The eyes you now see me with were the same eyes Orochimaru used to deceive us. That is why he was able to display some of the same abilities as Sasuke Uchiha. After he was dead, I transplanted the Sharingan and the Rinnegan he was using to deceive us into my eyes." He raised his right hand and slowly closed the coffin. After a moment of silence, he continued. "Now that you know the truth, I place before you two choices. If you, the people, will accept me, I will step up as our new leader. I promise you that through my leadership, the Hidden Rain village will once again return to its prime. We will return to the time long before the war. A time when we were respected, feared, and honored. We will once again train our shinobi to their fullest potential, because peace is no reason to grow weak." He paused, then continued in a grave voice, "And because sometimes, peace isn't an option." After a short pause, he continued in a more optimistic voice. "But I will only do these things if you, the people of AIM, allow me to. If not, then I will step down and our village will continue to limp along with no real leadership, but if you want all of the things I just spoke of. If you want Omegakure to be a great village again, then elect me to be your leader, because I am the answer." After a drawn-out silence, one citizen yelled out, "Elect Hiken." As he said it a second time, a few more people joined in, "Elect Hiken." By the third chant, a quarter of the city had joined in, "Elect Hiken." Over half of the city was yelling by the fourth cry, and by the fifth cry, Hiken had nearly unanimous approval from the village. As the people continued to yell for his election, Hiken gave a diplomatic smile, then raised a hand for them to stop. After a few moments, the chanting managed to come to a complete stop. Hiken spoke in a soft voice as he opened his arms in an accepting gesture, "You, the people, have spoken." As he continued, he spoke in a firm voice. "As of now, I proudly assume the role of leader of Omegakure." As soon as he finished his sentence, the people began to cheer and shout. Hiken let out another diplomatic smile and waited for the people to calm down. After a few moments of cheering their new leader, Hiken once again raised his hand to quiet them down. He continued to wear his diplomatic smile as he spoke into the camera. "It brings me great joy to now be the leader of this magnificent city. You, the people, have elected me with your mouths, but now you must elect me officially. I will prepare a decree making my leadership official. The decree will be sent out this evening and will simply ask if you are for or against my election. We already know the answer, but these things must be done." He smiled, then closed his right hand into a fist and held his arm out in a way that conveyed power before saying, "To a better Omegakure." The crowd started cheering and replied with an enthusiastic, "To a better Omegakure." Hiken gave one last diplomatic smile, then walked away from the camera waving. The crowds cheered until he was gone, then the TVs went back to the programs they were originally on. The village was now in a buzz after hearing they had a leader who shared their dreams for the future of a Megakure. Hiken turned to two assistants that were standing in the office and motioned over to Orochimaru's coffin with a look of disgust. "Get that thing out of my sight." The two nodded, then proceeded to carry the coffin out of the room. Hiken was now standing in the room with the cameraman and one other assistant. The cameraman was gathering his equipment to leave, but the assistant wasn't particularly busy. Hiken turned to him and said in a confident voice, "Tashisu, you served loyally when Orochimaru was impersonating Sasuke, now I want you to serve as my secretary." The mont's eyes slightly widened, and after a short pause he replied in an enthusiastic voice, "I'd be honored." Hiken smiled, then said, "Good, first things first, we need to start working on the decree I mentioned. The people need to know that they officially have a leader. It'll be good for their morale." The man smiled then said, "Then let's start working on it." Hiken smirked as he said, "Yes, but first," he walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of sake. A toast. He grabbed 2 wine glasses and proceeded to pour some sake for himself and Tashisu. "To a better Megakure." Tashisu smiled and replied in a voice that matched Hiken's enthusiasm. "To a better Megakure." As Hiken drank from his glass, he wore a slight smirk. He now had the trust of the village people and things were going according to plan. Naruto was now sitting at Ichiraku Ramen with a transformed clone impersonating Sasuke. He had already placed his usual order when he saw Kakashi walk up and sit next to him. Naruto turned and in an inquisitive voice said, "What's up?" Kakashi was already reading from his book as he replied, "I just talked to Tsunade. She said the decryption should be done within the hour, so eat quickly. We don't know exactly when it'll finish, but another mission could be coming up soon." Naruto nodded, then said, "Is that all you came to tell me?" Kakashi gave a short nod, "Yep. Tsunade put me in charge of knowing where you guys were so I could call you guys when the decryption finished. Now that I know where all of you are, I'll be able to call you guys when there's a development." Naruto tried to hide a semi-worried expression. He realized that he now had a slight problem. Kakashi thought he knew where Sasuke was, but he didn't. Kakashi examined Naruto for a little while before saying, "Don't worry. I know where the real Sasuke is." Naruto's head swiveled to Kakashi, then after thinking about it for a bit, Naruto let out a small smile and said, "Still sharp as ever, sensei." Kakashi smiled as he continued to read from his book. Kakashi noticed Naruto had something on his mind, but decided not to press him on it. If Sasuke's diagnosis was right, there had been enough of that already. After a few short moments, Ayame came out with the ramen Naruto had ordered. She said in a cheerful voice, "Your usual." Naruto smiled and matched her enthusiasm with a jovial, "Thanks." She smiled at the fact that he seemed to be a little back to his old self before returning to the kitchen. After Naruto was finished eating, he looked over to Kakashi who was still reading from his book. Naruto thought to himself for a few moments, then said in a contemplative voice, "Kakashi-sensei." Kakashi turned to him. "Yes." Naruto looked down into his ramen bowl. "I have a question." Kakashi nodded. "What is it?" Before Naruto could say anything else, Sakura ran up behind them. "We need you guys in the Hokage's office. You guys aren't gonna believe this." Naruto and Kakashi glanced at each other. Maybe the decryption was finished. They both stood up and started heading towards the Hokage's office with Sakura. Before they arrived at the office, Naruto quickly went up to the Hokage monument to get the real Sasuke. Tsunade was sitting with her fingers intertwined as she hunched over the Hokage's desk. Kakashi and Sakura were already in the office, then Naruto and Sasuke arrived. Tsunade looked up and turned around the computer. Kakashi looked down at it. "What is it?" Tsunade replied in a monotone voice, "See for yourself." Kakashi stepped towards the computer then squinted his eyes as he examined the screen. It was an email. After he realized what it was, he picked up the computer and started reading. After a few moments, he turned to the others in the room. This is a letter from the Hidden Rain village. As Naruto and Sasuke cast each other semi-confused glances, Kakashi started to read the letter. To all the villages within the nations. We are aware that there was a rumor that we had adopted Sasuke Uchiha as our new leader. There was also a rumor that we had aligned with the Sound and were planning an offensive against certain villages. This letter was sent to clarify these rumors and to also provide the villages with new information. Regarding our alliance with the Sound and plans of a future offensive against certain villages, we disavow all of these claims. We have no intentions of making any offensives against any of the villages. Regarding Sasuke Uchiha being our leader, this rumor was half true. Now Kakashi had everyone's attention, especially Sasuke's. Kakashi continued. The reason we say this rumor was half true, is because we were deceived. We were, in fact, rallying behind Sasuke Uchiha, but recently, it was discovered by an aide that Sasuke Uchiha was being impersonated by none other than Orochimaru. Sasuke turned to Kakashi and replied with an immediate, "What?" Naruto looked just as confused as Sasuke did. Kakashi shrugged, then continued. Orochimaru had been using a transformation jutsu to impersonate Sasuke. He also had a Rinnegan and a Sharingan that allowed him to mimic some of Sasuke Uchiha's abilities. This was discovered by a close assistant of Orochimaru's named Hiken Aniki. Sasuke slightly shook his head in annoyance while Naruto rolled his eyes and said, "Why am I not surprised?" Kakashi continued reading. Hiken caught Orochimaru releasing the transformation jutsu he was using to impersonate Sasuke. Orochimaru tried to once again deceive Hiken, but was unable to. Because Orochimaru was caught off guard, Hiken was able to strike from behind, effectively killing him. Naruto's mouth slightly dropped. Orochimaru is dead. Kakashi looked at the letter as he replied in a soft voice. It appears that way. Sasuke immediately said, "Appearances can be deceiving. Keep reading." Kakashi examined Sasuke for a second, then continued. After this, Hiken transplanted the Rinnegan and Sharingan into his own eyes and presented the truth to the people. Hiken proceeded to offer to take up the task of leading of the village. We believe that Hiken will be able to lead Megakure into a new era of peace and prosperity. It is for this reason that this letter has been sent to announce that, effective immediately, Hiken Aniki has officially been elected the leader of Megakure. Naruto's mouth dropped while Sasuke wore a pensive but somewhat disgusted expression. Kakashi put down the computer and turned it back in Tsunade's direction. He turned to Tsunade and said in an exasperated voice, "You can't be serious." Tsunade sat back in her chair as she replied. That email arrived a few minutes ago. I think Hiken wanted to get the news of his election out fast. This email was probably sent to all of the villages. All of the villages that don't only use Hawks, that is. If you look at the bottom, the message was sent from the new official email address of Megakure. After a short pause, Tsunade continued. An official election document confirming Hiken's election is attached to that email. He is now the official leader of Megakure. We should expect an official scroll in the coming days. After a few seconds of silence, Sasuke spoke up. Hiken is obviously lying. He was too experienced with his Rinnegan for it to have been transplanted anytime recently. He just needed a scapegoat that he could paint as my impersonator so he could assume power. Naruto said in a slightly angry voice, "He's lying through his teeth and they elected him to be their leader." Kakashi replied, "Well, the people obviously don't know he's lying, or they wouldn't have elected him." Naruto thought about it, then crossed his arms in a semi-pouting stance. Tsunade let out a sigh and turned to Kakashi. Hiken is playing this brilliantly. Kakashi put a hand on his chin. I know. Before anyone could say anything else, the computer made a beeping sound. Tsunade looked at the screen. It read, "Decryption complete." She cast everyone in the room a glance, then turned the computer around. Sakura walked towards it and started opening the file. Tsunade walked from behind the desk so she could see the computer, then turned to Kakashi. The moment of truth, Kakashi gave a small nod. After a few seconds, the file finally opened. It read, "Oh oh." Sakura gave everyone a glance, then clicked on it to open it. At the top of the page it read in bold red letters, Operation Onslaught, Phase 1. As the group looked at the screen, their eyes widened at the scope of what was being planned. On the screen was a map of the known shinobi world. 6 villages had a large, red X over them. Naruto whispered in a low voice, "No way." The group looked to the right of the map. In addition to being crossed out on the map, the villages that were going to be attacked were listed to the right. Hidden Sand Village, Hidden Cloud Village, Hidden Grass Village, Hidden Hot Water Village, Hidden Sound Village, Hidden Stone Village. After a few seconds of standing in shock, Kakashi said, "When is this supposed to happen?" Sakura scrolled down and her mouth fell open as she read off the information. "It's supposed to happen today, at 3:30 p.m. As soon as she said that, everyone turned to the clock on the wall. 1:32 p.m. Kakashi started scratching his forehead and said in a voice that conveyed a newfound urgency, "That's not a lot of time. This isn't good." After a moment of stunned silence, Sakura continued, "It says the attacks are all going to take place simultaneously." Kakashi dropped his head, then turned to Tsunade. "Okay, this really isn't good. As a matter of fact, this just turned into a major problem." Tsunade just kept staring at the screen. After a little while, Sasuke spoke up, "How does he can even have the audacity to attack all these villages at once? Where is he getting the firepower from? Those eyes he has might make him strong enough to take down one village on his own, but these attacks are all supposed to happen at the same time. He needs some really heavy hitters." Kakashi looked down to the screen. "I have no idea where he's getting his firepower from, but he's already shown he's crafty enough to become the leader of a Megakure in an instant. We don't know if he has any allies we don't know about. We have to take him seriously." Kakashi turned to Tsunade. "We need to notify the villages that are in danger right now. We don't know how powerful these assaults will be, so since we're not on the list of villages to be attacked, we should send aid. When you send the email to the villages that are in danger, make sure to let them know we'll be sending aid." Tsunade was knocked out of her daze and managed to say in a low voice, "Yeah. I'll start on them now." After a short pause, Tsunade asked, "But what about the villages that still communicate by hawk like the sand?" Kakashi thought for a second, then replied, "They'll have to learn of the intel when our aid arrives." Tsunade paused, then nodded. She reached down to her right and pulled out another laptop while the others continued to go over the new intel. Kakashi looked to Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura. "While Tsunade notifies the other villages, we need to figure out how we're going to help. That starts with figuring out how we're gonna get shinobi in all those different places in under 2 hours." Kakashi looked over to Sasuke. "I know that on your last mission you had problems with your Rinnegan due to exhaustion, but do you think that if Naruto continues to give you chakra, you could eventually get everyone to where they needed to be?" Sasuke looked down pensively for a few seconds, then replied, "When I use my space-time dojutsu, I quickly pass through another dimension and exit in this one. The location I arrive at corresponds to which dimension I pass through. When we went on the mission to a Megakure, I didn't know which dimension would lead to us exiting at a Megakure. I noticed it was raining in one of the other dimensions and it ended up leading us to a Megakure. In other words, we got lucky." Kakashi paused for a second. "So you don't know which dimensions lead to which villages?" Quote. Sasuke replied, "I only know where 2 dimensions led. I know how to get to a Megakure because of our recent mission, and I know how to get to here in Konoha. I never had any reason to learn where the other dimensions led to." My theory is that the conditions in those other dimensions reflect the conditions in our dimension. I think that's why it was raining in the dimension that led to the hidden rain village. The problem is that if I'm wrong, we could be playing a guessing game for a long time. Kakashi slowly nodded as he replied, so in other words, we could waste time, a lot of time, which we don't have. Sasuke slowly nodded. Naruto turned to Sasuke. When we got to Omegakure, I didn't notice us passing through any other dimension. Sasuke continued to look at the computer screen as he replied. That's because you don't have a Rinnegan. I scanned at least 5 different dimensions before taking us through the one that led to Omegakure. Naruto's eyes widened and his mouth dropped a little as Sasuke continued. That's also why my Rinnegan was so exhausted after one trip. I could get to Omegakure easily now, but only because I now know which dimension to pass through to get there. After a short pause, Naruto slowly gave a nod of understanding, then said, first we need to find out which villages me and Sasuke are going to. Then we can focus on how we'll get there. Kakashi looked at the ground pensively for a few moments, then said, good point. If Hiken is personally involved in this assault, we have to make sure he runs into one of you guys, which means we have to figure out which 2 villages he's most likely to attack. After a drawn-out silence, Naruto said, the only 3 villages that would probably require someone of Hiken's caliber to take them down are the Cloud, the Stone and the Sand. He might be personally involved in the attack on one of those villages. Kakashi thought about it as he slowly nodded. Sasuke looked at the screen for a little, then said, I'll go to the stone. Naruto, you go to the sand. The Cloud has Killer Bee. Even with Hiken's visual prowess, Killer Bee is a powerful Jinchuriki. Bee's power combined with all of the Cloud's powerful shinobi should be able to repel an assault even if Hiken is there. Tsunade paused for a moment, then turned to Kakashi. The council might have a problem with that since Sasuke is still supposed to be with Naruto at all times. Kakashi let out a small sigh. We don't have time for that. If they want to stop him, let them try. Right now we need to worry about how we're gonna help the other villages. Tsunade nodded in agreement. After a few seconds, Kakashi said, what Sasuke suggested could work, but we still have to send a group to the Cloud to at least help. Sasuke nodded in agreement. After a few seconds of thinking, Kakashi said, I'll lead a team to the Cloud, Sakura will lead a team to the Sound, we'll have Guy lead a team to the hot water and Shikamaru will lead a team to the grass. Tsunade, as Hokage, you'll have to stay here. Tsunade was now typing away at the computer and replied with a quick, got it. Kakashi looked around the room and said, now the last problem, how will we get our shinobi to those different villages so quickly? Naruto looked down pensively as he got an idea. He turned to Kakashi. What if I use a Kurama avatar to transport shinobi? Kakashi turned to Naruto and said in an unsure voice, just how fast can you fly with a Kurama avatar? Naruto looked down. I have no idea, but I think I'm fast enough to get everyone to where they need to be. Kakashi looked at Naruto with a more serious expression and said in a concerned voice, do you really think you have the chakra to sustain a Kurama avatar while traveling that fast for that long? Naruto thought to himself, then replied, I'll be fine. I probably can't sustain any clones though, although it would be helpful, the only concern I have is regarding the Cloud. It's out of my way. I might not be able to reach everywhere in time if I go there. Sasuke looked over at a map of the shinobi world that was on the office wall. He said in a thoughtful voice, if you didn't have to go to the Cloud, you could just circle through the other villages starting at the hot water and ending at the sand. Kakashi looked at the map as he reflected on their current dilemma. After a few seconds of looking at the map, Sasuke spoke up. What if I used my Susanoo to fly Sakura's team to the Cloud, then took my team to the stone? Kakashi turned to Sasuke. You don't have the massive chakra reserves Naruto has. You could run out of chakra before you even got to the stone, Sasuke and Kakashi kept looking at the map trying to find a way to make the plan work. Just then, Naruto got an idea. He walked over to the map and pointed to the hot water village. What if after I went to the hot water village, he moved his finger to the sound? I waited for Sasuke at the sound. I could infuse more chakra while I waited, then give him some to recharge him. Kakashi turned to Tsunade, who was now looking up from the email she was writing. Sasuke spoke into the silence. Naruto's plan works. After a few seconds of silence, Kakashi said in a low voice, "Okay. We'll do that." After a short pause, he looked at everyone in the room. This has turned into a very eventful day. Get ready to leave and meet up at the main gate by 2 p.m. I'm going to go get everyone we need. Tsunade turned to Kakashi before he left. I just sent the email to the Cloud and the Stone. The other villages will have to find out what's going on when we get to them. Kakashi nodded, then opened the door. He looked over at the clock. 1:43 p.m. He paused for a second, then turned around to face everyone in the room and said in a grave voice, "We're on the clock, let's make sure we beat it." Everyone gave a nod and proceeded to prepare to leave.